turn for comments.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Jeff Golden. I represent Senate District 3 and generally speaking, sit in the seat where Senator Girard is right now. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate remote under the circumstances. Thanks very much for that. Because I'm just sitting here with my computer and a dog that's whining to go out, I think rather than wing it, I'm going to read most of what I have to say. I think that'll end up being more concise. And I'll start by saying I think it's great we're coming to session with the ingredients for a serious conversation on the best way to reliably fund programs that'll keep our communities from burning to the ground and our state overall from horrific smoke episodes more summers than not, along with the associated costs of billions of dollars. And I think we all get that, but we do have to make sure not to let the relative absence of disasters in the 21, 22, and 23 fire seasons, which are thanks to the firefighting strategies of Senate Bill 762 and the terrific work of ODF and its local partners, we can't let all that lull us into thinking that the annual threat is anything other than critical and imminent. So I'm intrigued by Rep. Evans' proposal and appreciate that he's going big in his proposal, as I'm trying to do. As to Senator Steiner's, I genuinely appreciate all the effort she, Doug Graff, and others invested in solving the landowner protection assessment snarl that tangled us up at the end of the last session. And we have very different opinions about the resulting recommendation. We do agree that wildfire is a crisis threatening all Oregonians, that we all have to pitch in. We should talk more carefully about how that already happens today and whether it's time for all of us to pay more. That's a very important conversation, and I'll leave that and other important issues, like some of the issues Representative Brock Smith brought up today, for another day in order to focus on what I'm suggesting, which is a referral to the voters this November of an updated version of the timber severance tax that was discontinued in the 1990s. In the meeting materials, you'll find a detailed news feature about the severance tax's demise and the consequences that's had for local communities and our state's capacity to manage forests and fight fires. This new severance tax that we would offer up to voters would completely replace the current harvest tax, which is jaw-droppingly complex. There were references to that today, and the committee knows that well. We've had agency staff painstakingly try to explain it to us twice that I can remember, and I have doubts whether we'd have passed a quiz after they finished. I don't think we can do a good job of assessing the quality of a tax structure that's so difficult to understand. So in place of the current harvest tax, this proposal levies a tax on the value, not the volume, of timber harvested on private lands. The rate of taxation is graduated according to the acreage of the property where harvest takes place. No tax at all on properties of 500 acres or less, increasing in tiers of 1% at a time and maxing out at 6% for properties over 5,000 acres. That part of the bill needs refinement to fit better with the particulars of different kinds of timber operations, and I'm in conversations that aim to bring an amendment to session. There's another element in the current draft that may or may not be in the final version as I talk to more legislators, a discount on those taxes, which also differs according to acreage, for owners who attain certification from the Forest Stewardship Council for managing land sustainably. But what deserves the most focus, the reason for this bill, is how we'll use the revenue. It's divided into 4 buckets. 25% goes to ODF to cover almost all the elements paid for by the harvest tax we'd be eliminating, including the base fire protection piece, plus the Oregon Conservation Corps. That would still leave a lot of firefighting costs to the general fund, but that amount would be far, far less than the $200 million we spent on Senate Bill 762. A second 25% in this proposal goes to the Office of the State Fire Marshal for programs to reduce risk and increase the fire readiness in our communities. This is the core motivator for this bill. Let me share just a very few numbers. We're dealing here with a segment of the overall wildfire strategy that's titled Fire Adapted Communities. And most of the legislation we've seen and will see this session uses a generic label of community risk reduction. In the 21-23 budget, at the direction of Senate Bill 762, we put $35 million into community risk reduction, and the fire marshal used it very effectively to fortify fire service capacity and training and staffing and risk reduction activities all over the state. From the perspective of keeping our communities intact, this was a brilliant investment. This biennium, despite plenty of professional testimony about how vital these programs are, that number was slashed by more than 90%, from $35 million to $3 million. We'll be trying to boost that total this session in a couple different ways, including a bill that this committee is about to introduce as LC 81, which would invest $5 million in neighborhood protection cooperatives. But my takeaway from the experience is that while we can count on the current funding system to provide what's needed to fight fires, and Doug Graff gave detail on that when he was talking about adequate level of protection legal requirements, we don't have that reliability, that confidence when it comes to preventing catastrophic fires, what the fire marshal has shown her organization can do so well. When I talk about our solemn duty to do what we can to keep Oregon communities from burning down, you've heard me on that more than once, this is what I'm talking about. So, 25% to ODF, 25% to the Office of Fire Marshal, then 40% to the counties where timber is harvested, which was one of the uses of the old severance tax and hasn't been there since it ended. These funds would be unrestricted. Counties could use them as they choose. The final 10% would be used for protection and restoration of public water supplies on forest lands that are threatened by a combination of wildfire, floods, and destabilized soils. More and more Oregon towns, mostly on or near the coast, are facing serious drinking water crises far beyond their resources to solve. This unmet need is getting more severe. So once more, 1/4 to ODF, 1/4 to the fire marshal, 40% to the counties where timber is harvested, 10% to protect small municipal water supplies. That's what this program would fund. And if there is another funding strategy that could meet those needs that I believe are critical, I want to find out more about it. The obvious drawback of this proposal is how some will reflexively see it as slandering the timber industry, which so easily drops us back into the timber war mindset that has never once led to good policy solutions. I wish that weren't the case. I've never once laid awake thinking up ways to make life harder for the timber industry. I've laid awake lots of nights, especially windy summer nights, wondering how we're going to sustainably prevent repeats of what's happened in Paradise and Santa Rosa and Phoenix and Talent and Otis and the towns along the Santiam and McKenzie River canyons. Our conversation this session is about finding the best way to reliably fund protection of Oregon communities, the option with the fewest shortcomings, and to find it fast wherever that takes us. Some places that takes us are hard to go. I recently had a conversation about the bill with a timber industry executive about all this, and to put it mildly, he doesn't like it a bit. His company has significant challenges. He thinks they're already paying enough, and in different ways are doing a lot for communities. Many companies are, and Oregon's the better for it. But we're ignoring the elephant in the room if we don't recognize that since the severance tax ended, forest ownership has largely shifted from companies invested in their communities to national or global real estate investment trusts, REITs, that enjoy precisely crafted tax breaks, don't show much interest in bolstering communities, and are contractually bound, no matter what the circumstances, to maximize return to their shareholders, who for the most part might have trouble finding Oregon on the map. To whatever extent possible, it's that sector, not the small to mid-sized operations based firmly and loyally in Oregon communities, that a restored severance tax should focus on. For more context on that, I'll refer a second time to the news article posted in the meeting materials. I ask you to read it before coming to firm judgment on this proposal. I'll close by suggesting that it's too late in the game to let ourselves fall back into stale, pointless timber wars thinking. We have to look at where we are with clear eyes. The challenges to our well-being, possibly Oregon's survival, have become too big to solve with the toolkit that brought us here. The kind of changes we need won't be easy. If that's true when it comes to homelessness and mental health, substance abuse, it is definitely true for wildfire. We've watched enough of our communities burn nearly to the ground, and with even drier, hotter, windier summers ahead, we'll watch it again and again unless we bolster our community's readiness with reliable, tried and true program investments. Reliable programs means reliable funding. We all know this bill wouldn't be a perfect answer, and we all know there isn't one, but it's a realistic answer, and I suggest we let the people of Oregon have their say this November on whether it suits the challenge in front of us. How do we afford to protect their communities, our communities, from the ravages of wildfires our summers get hotter and windier and drier? I welcome your ideas, the ideas of our colleagues, and all suggestions on making this proposal better before handing it to Oregon voters. Really appreciate the time today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions at all? Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Golden. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Thank you. In your proposal that I've seen, you have basically 40% goes to the counties, and then 25% would go to home hardening. Is that correct?
No, a broader category. Senator Girard and Senator Smith, no, not just to home hardening. Home hardening would be one qualified expenditure within the broader category of community risk reduction. As I said, we spent $35 million on that in Senate Bill 762. It was administered by the Fire Marshal's Office, and there's a whole panoply of services that range from potentially home hardening, help with defensible space, to staffing and equipment support for smaller, financially challenged fire districts and protection districts. It's what unites them is mitigation and risk reduction. That's the common theme.
Thank you. And yes, State Fire Marshal Ruiz Temple has done a fantastic job with the resources. Having a district that has seen so much fire, and that fire, particularly on the federal landscape, it is in my well, I'll just start over. In the past, I have seen that my private timber owners, which we just are being attacked left and right by the environmental for-profit nonprofits and others. You have a situation where Banks, Timber Mill in Banks has announced that they're closing. You have the attack from the Board of Forestry and the HCP when there's other alternatives. I was down in your neck of the woods when I was a county commissioner and learned from the U.S. Forest Service as they presented that no amount of conservation will save the spotted owl on the west side of the state. So with that preemptive comment, why, as we know, that only 5% of the acres burned in these areas are fires kept on, that start on private timberlands and then are kept to less than 100 acres. So we know that those managed lands of our private timber owners, and the data supports that, they are not contributing really to the catastrophic megafires, but that of the federal government managed lands are. Why should the private timber companies in this state carry the burden of the wildfire cost associated with federal lands that are not?
That's a fair question, Senator Smith. And let me say this. I took pretty careful notes as you were speaking a while back about the statistics. I think I want to research that more because I think it's really important that we begin with a shared factual foundation on what's going on. Whatever the actual numbers, I think you have some valid concerns here. A couple things. The reason I keep referring, or have referred twice, to the news coverage, the extensive news coverage about the discontinuation of the severance tax, is that has to be understood, or else we're going to get into an inaccurate, simplistic argument about for or against the timber industry. The timber industry is variegated, and there is no question that there are major sectors of it that are really financially challenged right now. And this is what I was referring to about the need to adjust the tiers and the rates to the fiscal realities of different companies. And I am really talking, and I'm going to ask you to read that article about what has happened since the discontinuation of the severance tax, which was a viable approach for several decades before it ended in the 1990s, and the advent of the REITs and how much of our forests they own now and what their situation is. So we're not going to get into an argument about whether parts of the timber industry are seeing some really difficult times. My hope is that there could be some collaboration on designing a tax structure that's not god-awful complex, that reflects those very different business models and current predicaments of different sectors of the timber industry. But to me, it's a kind of a distraction and false flag to point out accurately that we have timber operations that are in distress.
Can I follow up?
Sure. Senator Brock Smith.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator. I appreciate, of course, always your openness and the collaboration and conversation. I know that one of the issues, and I know that climate change is a huge issue for you, and we've had these conversations in the past. As we move forward, I just want to throw this out there when we're talking about these issues and moving forward. We have a housing problem in this state. We need resources to build those houses. We import 35% roughly of our logs so that we can turn them into sticks so we can build those houses when we have resources right down the road. And you are very familiar with because you just actually got back from Lehigh that I did a couple years ago, and are very familiar with leakage and the leakage associated with, and just for those layman's out there, when it comes to leakage, trees sequester carbon. When you import trees, your emissions associated with doing so is just putting more carbon in the air, and that is called leakage. And so I'm hoping that as we have this conversation moving forward, that we can broaden it to have a more holistic view on how we solve these problems. Because in my opinion, in my constituents' opinion, our timber industries are our local economic drivers. Roseburg Forest Products is investing $700 million in our local community so that we can have resources and build those homes across the state. Ferris Lumber has invested millions in CLT, which we know is one of the most fantastic in all the data and science coming out from those buildings in the carbon sequestration benefits, but not also the resiliency of those buildings when it comes to fire, earthquake, so forth. And they're building them all over the world. But when the first tech building was built in Hillsboro, one at the time, a few years ago, the largest CLT building being built in the country, those materials were shipped on emitting vehicles, all of them, from Vancouver, BC, when we had the resources right down the road. And so I'm hopeful that we can come to an understanding that our timber industry folks in this state are our friends. They're the ones that are going to be supplying the resources to build the 36,000 homes that the governor is wanting to do. And when it comes to the overall climate aspect that you are so passionate about, it does no good to create emissions by bringing in resources that store carbon in our state. Thanks.
I look forward to that conversation, Senator Brock-Smith.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Prozanski.
Thank you. I look forward to that conversation too, Senator Smith. It's just kind of amazing seeing how many timber operations in the state contract their logs to go out of state, to go to different countries, because they can get a higher dollar value. And then you're complaining about we're bringing stuff in. We got to do something. It'd be great to have that conversation, and maybe we can get our Oregon timber industry to actually invest here instead of moving their logs out to be milled or whatever else in another country.
Senator Brock-Smith.
No, there's nothing to say.
No, I love to have this conversation, Senator, because when it comes to timber exports, you can't export federal timber. And so the opportunity to actually access those resources on the federal side to manage those stands so that we aren't taxing Oregonians, to mitigate catastrophic wildfire that the data shows is coming off federal landscape and burning private timber, to which those private timber companies do not get any payment from the federal government to replant those trees.
So your complaint really is with the federal government. So why don't we ratchet and bring them in, and we can't do anything because the reality, we've tried that. The vice chair and I have had multiple conversations with the federal partners we have in fighting fires. And here we are, we're still having the conversations.
I look forward to the opportunity for you and I, Senator, to go to our federal delegation, not just in Oregon, but the western states, because it's a western states issue, and have those conversations with our federal partners so that we can change these situations that are actually causing the problem.
Any other comments? Senator Golden, I actually have one. I share Senator Brock-Smith's concern about throwing all the responsibility on the timber companies. From a timber area, there's a good chance I'd lose 2 mills, and one would probably close and one would probably move to Georgia or someplace like that. The question I have for you is, we got 2 other proposals that seem to be more balanced. Did you listen to those, and is there any one of those 2 that you think you could get behind?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are definitely elements. The piece in the Senator Steiner work group that updates and indexes the fees that industry has been paying on harvest and related matters that have been flat since 2007, adjusting them for inflation sounds totally straightforward. I'm not really understanding why we haven't done that so far. I'll be in full support of that. The larger and clearly more controversial piece, and in some ways this is shared with Rep. Evans' proposal, which I want to study more, I find it pretty interesting, is taking the next major chunk of resources to pay for wildfire from the general public at large, on the premise that this is an all-Oregon problem and we need all hands on deck. I think that premise is exactly right. I mean, we all need to be involved with this. What the conversation has to include is, how are Oregonians all paying right now today? And it would be very interesting to hear from some of the fire protection districts and the big challenges they're having with their patrons, their citizens, as they're needing to increase their costs, what those folks are paying now. In some cases, it even applies in cities with increased fees from fire departments. So we need which is to say nothing of the general income tax that Oregonians all pay now, some of which goes to wildfire. So the question is not should all Oregonians pay for wildfire, it's how much are they paying now, and is it time to ask them to pay more? My view is that it's unbalanced to say to Oregonians, we're initiating a new fee that's never been here before, which, by the way, they're naturally going to see as a Pandora's box, and what else are we going to load onto that fee as we have other big needs over the years. But we're going to do that now with a proposal that actually cuts costs for some of the biggest operations and call that equitable and all hands on deck. So the conversation I'd be interested in is there some possibility for integration where you'd look at a general fee or tax of some kind in return for some of what we lost in the severance tax, and especially the type of organization, which I don't think are the mills in your district, Senator, that are paying significantly less than they did when the severance tax ended. That's the conversation. Where's the balance point? I couldn't support a general assessment in the absence of some kind of contribution from the organizations I've been talking about.
Thank you.
And let me, one more thing, Senator, and this, I know this is a long one, if I may. The work group of Senator Steiner's, which she, ran by me at the end of last session when we had this problem with the landowner assessment, was charged originally, according to my understanding, with solving that $15 million problem that emerged in a big way with, I think, miscommunication at the end of the last session. That had to happen. And in my view, it was totally appropriate for the Ways and Means co-chair to take that on. I think it got problematic in a closed-door session when their work crept beyond that to more general discussions about how to fund wildfire. I think that was unfortunate.
Any other comments at all? I'm going to make a brief comment here, and it was something that Mr. Graff said, and I found really interesting, and that is we lost 645,000 acres on average in the last 10 years. But 10 years prior to that, we only lost half of that, and 10 years prior to that, we lost another half. I know climate change could be part of that, mismanagement can be part of that, but the facts are still clear that 20 years ago we didn't have that much damage to our forests, and I would like to suggest that there's been a change in how we approach fires. It used to be we tried to put them out in 24 hours, especially on federal land. And so I would like to add a fourth possible answer to the solution, and I talked to Senator Golden about this and others, and that is that we fund 4 Black Hawk 70 helicopters that are designed to fight fires. The cost of that would be between $100 and probably $125 million, and that we would do that through capital construction. And then if we do go onto federal forest land, we bill them. I understand that there is a lag time between the billing of our services and getting paid, but I do think that that is something that we need to consider. So that's my little 2 bits. Anybody else have anything they want to throw out?
Senator Girard, I just want you to know that I know somebody of some influence on the Capital Construction Committee, and I'll have a word with him about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wish I could deliver.